This happened when I was around 17 years old, and it's still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked, surrounded by coworkers who didn't like me. A lot of it had to do with my accent. I spoke more formally, which made them think I was a rich kid. It all started one Friday after work. The factory I worked at had half days on Fridays, and I would often spend the rest of the day wandering around the city. That day had been particularly rough, with relentless mocking from my colleagues, and I was reaching my breaking point. Desperate for a change, I decided to look for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the Army, Navy, Air Force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to escape. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets, but still no real direction. That's when I turned a corner and saw a sign. Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in. Above it, the building had a large sign that read, The Church of Scientology. Now, before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. I'd heard the horror stories and the controversies, but I was morbidly curious. Plus, Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life figured out. Famous last words, right? So I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very kind woman who asked how I was and what she could do for me. I told her I was interested in learning more about the church and the personality test. She smiled and said, "I'd be happy to help. Please have a seat, and I'll get someone for you." A minute later, I was introduced to an older man named Alan, who was the head of the city's Scientology Center. Alan took me to a small private room where we could talk. I immediately noticed the large portrait of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down, and honestly, it started out as a genuinely nice conversation. I told him how unhappy I was with my life, about the trouble at work and how I wanted to get away from everything. He seemed concerned and like he really wanted to help. After a while, I agreed to take the personality test. He gave me the test and told me to hand it in at reception when I was done. 2 hours later, yes, 2 hours, I finally finished the test. It was 500 questions long, asking about everything under the sun. I handed the test to the receptionist, who told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had asked her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I was expecting a small room with a TV, but no, they actually had a full-on cinema that seated around 50 people, with a large screen at the front. It felt strange being the only person in there, but I figured not many people could say they'd had this experience. The film they showed me was about 30 minutes long. It talked about strange feelings you might have, like self-doubt or insecurity, with some pretty mediocre acting to illustrate the points. I remember one part about how an event from when your mother was pregnant with you could negatively affect your life. For example, if she got sick on a flight, you might develop a fear of flying. Another part mentioned how something as simple as a rotten egg could deeply impact you. As strange as it sounds, some of it actually made sense to me at the time. When the film ended, I was taken back to Alan's office where he had my test results. He told me I was extremely depressed, unmotivated, lacked cognitive thinking, and was essentially wasting my talent. I felt crushed, but Alan reassured me that he could help. He handed me 4 books and a DVD, telling me to read and watch everything before attending a course he had signed me up for. I was confused. I hadn't agreed to any course, but he insisted that without it, my life would spiral out of control. I ended up paying a significant amount of money for this course, which was scheduled to take place in a month. That weekend, I locked myself in my room and did nothing but read the books and watch the DVD on repeat. By the next week, I had started taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan constantly with questions and concerns. I started to resent my mother, thinking she was the cause of all my problems. Alan encouraged this. even suggesting I consider disconnecting from her. I took his words seriously. A week before the course, I had developed a kind of God complex. The books had convinced me of my potential, and I began to see everyone around me, especially my family, as beneath me. I became spiteful and mean-spirited. Just days before the course, my parents confronted me. They had searched my room and found the Scientology books and DVD. I was outraged. I screamed at them, said horrible things, and told them I was planning to leave them for good. We argued for hours, but eventually they convinced me that Scientology was dangerous. They reminded me that if I was miserable at work, I should have told them. I can't believe I didn't. That night, after things had calmed down, my parents comforted me. Despite everything I had said and done, they still cared for me. The next day, I emailed Alan to tell him I wouldn't be coming back to the church. He responded almost immediately, asking if my family had pressured me and urging me to reconsider. Over the next few weeks, he sent increasingly disturbing emails, including one where he implied that if I didn't come back, he wouldn't be surprised to hear I had died by suicide. He even sent an email written entirely in binary code, which, when I translated it, made no sense. I eventually blocked him, but the emails haven't stopped. 2 or 3 times a year, I get messages from the church asking how I'm doing or about my family. I block each new address, but they always find a way to reach out again. The reason I'm writing this is because I just received another email from them the other day, and I want to warn others. Please don't go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can turn someone like me into a hateful person in a matter of hours, imagine what they could do in months or years. If you're feeling lost, sad, or upset, please talk to your family, friends, or a doctor. Don't let someone else turn you into a monster. I'm happy and confident now, but it took time and support to get here. Thank you for reading and have a great day. Oh, and Alan, if you're reading this, you made me into a monster, so for your sake, let's not meet again. "9 years ago, I met a person that, to this day, I still wish I never had. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader with the added struggle of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town. So basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make friends with my new classmates. All of my old friends from elementary school were placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We were also all in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was so lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could access at school, that I kept hidden from my parents. I used it to check out my favorite fandoms and hopefully make some new friends. One day, I was on Google Plus in the computer lab, and I commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling with joy. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comments section. We ended up replying so much, we flooded a good portion of the comments with our conversation. After I had to change classes, I logged back in on one of the Chromebooks we had stored in the back of the class and saw that she had actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least, she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not so sure it was. In the message I got, Haley told me she was 2 years older than me and that we had a lot in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not caring about anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in our direct messages until she suggested we chat in a private chat room. Later that day, we made a private chat on an online messaging site. In our first conversation, we initially talked through messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she said it was only to help us have a better conversation. Eventually, after she asked me multiple times, I gave in. After an hour of talking, she suggested we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure she was actually my age and to put a face to a name. Haley turned on her camera, and she did look like she was around my age. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked so close to my age, plus her friendly smile and easygoing conversation, made me feel like I had nothing to fear. So I quickly believed I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after that, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time. At the beginning of our friendship, things seemed to be going all right. We told each other about our schools, talked about what we liked, and gushed over our favorite series. We talked almost every day, staying up late and chatting nearly all night. We even exchanged a few silly pictures and memes back and forth. After we had been talking for 6 months, Haley asked if I would like to meet her friends. At first, I was ecstatic. The thought of having more friends made me so excited that I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invited me in, and I got to meet her other friends, but I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to what I felt with Haley. Something made me feel unsafe in that chat room, even though they all seemed nice, and Haley reassured me I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so I ignored it. Most of them were much older than me. In a chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were 18 or 19, but there were 2 guys that I distinctly remember being in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they told me they met either on another social media site or in real life, but they wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was naive, so all of the red flags went completely over my head. From constant loud talking to frequently overlapping each other, the calls I was on with them were pure chaos. The messages were even worse, with frequent cursing and topics that shouldn't be discussed with someone who was still a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, but they all acted dismissive toward me and treated me like I was annoying whenever I tried to join the conversation. Needless to say, I did not like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the same habits, make the same jokes, and use the same dirty words with the others. They could say something super problematic, and she would laugh right along with them. I was shocked by this version of Haley because she never acted like this when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a lot, but slowly she started talking to her other friends more than she talked to me. At first I thought it was fine, but the more she ignored my messages or didn't answer my calls, the more it bothered me. When I called to confront Haley about blowing me off, she went ballistic. She said I was being selfish and that I didn't want her talking to her other friends because I was jealous. I explained that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen, and then she hung up on me. Haley ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught. I cried during our first call, apologizing for what I said the last time we talked. She told me it was fine. She just needed some time alone, and she promised to talk to me a bit more. And indeed she did, though not in the way I thought she would. Haley began to tell me she had depression, and that was why she didn't talk to me for a month. I didn't judge her, and told her that whenever she needed to talk, I was there for her. This led to her trauma dumping on me nearly every day, talking about her awful home life, her bad relationship with her mom, and how much she hated herself. I was there to listen and offer kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily in the middle of any conversation, she would start complaining about something in her day. If not that, she'd talk about how ugly she thought she was or how much her life sucked, and she'd say she wanted to end things. That last part freaked me out the most. I worried about her because we lived in different states, and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she became self-deprecating, I would try to cheer her up, giving her compliments and affirmations for so long that my throat would ache and feel raw. And then, just as fast as she'd bring it up, she'd drop the conversation, and we'd talk like nothing happened. Haley also started calling me for long periods and texting me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch for hours, and her texts would come in until 3 or 4 in the morning. The thing was, she was the one doing most of the talking now. In every phone call, she would take over the conversation. If I didn't message her back quickly enough, she would spam me with multiple texts faster than I could read them. I would try to end the conversation myself, but every time I did, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave when, not long ago, I wanted her attention. She guilt-tripped me into staying, and it worked. Even if I had lost interest in our talks or didn't want her messaging me during class, I would still let her talk and reply. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to talk to me. This went on in a cycle for 2 years, leaving me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else ever had. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore. She would either ghost me for a week or text me non-stop for an entire weekend. The topics about her self-worth also got worse. They escalated to her messaging me things like, "Goodbye," or "I can't live like this anymore," without responding to any of my messages or calls. The sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks. Afterward, I would cry for hours. Not only that, but the group chat with her other friends got worse too. Arguments broke out frequently, drama and gossip spread like wildfire, and people were blocked and unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them. They began ganging up on me, and Haley was often the first to make rude jokes about me that they would all laugh at. I got sick of it and stopped messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me to. One late night while the group was arguing over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of the drama and of being treated like garbage. So I messaged the group chat, telling them I'd had enough, then privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. After that, I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone, deleted my messaging account, and cleared the site from my computer's history. Once it was all over, I felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria over the whole thing being over. I later found out that all of the pictures Haley had sent me were all stock images and photoshopped. I also found out from a bit of digging through her background, a lot of things didn't add up. I learned that she was actually a lot older than what she originally told me, at least 6 years older than me. Meaning that when we first met when I was 14, she was about 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me. For almost 3 months, I would have nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she would say or do to me. I have many better friends now, and I am absolutely certain I will never have to hear from Haley again. But sometimes I still wonder who that woman really was. And what was it about me that she was interested in? Hopefully, I won't ever find out. So, to Haley, if you somehow ever find this story, let's not meet again. Edit. For clarification, and the fact I got tired of explaining it in the comment section. The pictures she would send me when we would message each other were all pictures of her friends and family, places she claimed to have been to, and items she owned. A few weeks after I blocked Haley, I found them stored on my computer. I got curious, so I reversed image searched the pictures she sent me, and they were all stock photos. Every result I found from her picture led back to a stock photo site, with the only difference between them being that she cropped out the logo of the site from the pictures. Basically, I was lied to a lot. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of what was happening may not totally make sense. This took place in the 90s. One night, my mom and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I assume it was really late because there weren't many cars on the street, and I had fallen asleep in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in the car. My mom drove up to a sketchy house and left me in the car alone for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open and someone violently grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man who grabbed me looked me in the eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was terrified, so I listened. He held me tight, shut the car door, and began dragging me down the street. I kept looking back at the house where my mom had gone, hoping she would come out at the last second and save me. But as we got further and further away, the house disappeared from view. I wanted to cry, but I was too scared and in shock to do anything. Every time I sniffled, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't explain how scared and confused I was. We ended up walking to the projects, a bunch of buildings crammed together in a rundown neighborhood. He took me into one of the buildings and up a flight of stairs. My feet were aching, but I didn't dare complain. We climbed another set of stairs, and that's when I saw a random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairwell. Then, out of nowhere, my kidnapper was on the ground. It happened so fast I didn't even see it. 1 second he was pulling me along. The next, the cigarette guy was kicking him in the head and punching him. The kidnapper was knocked out cold. Cigarette guy grabbed him by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how terrifying it is to see a man fall down a flight of stairs, unconscious. There was blood everywhere. I have no idea how the cigarette guy knew to help me, but I'm so grateful he did. Maybe he could see the fear in my eyes, or maybe he just got a bad vibe, but he attacked my kidnapper instantly. Afterward, he started pacing back and forth, swearing under his breath, clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up, with an attitude that scared me. I wasn't as afraid of him as I was of the bearded man, but I was still scared. He began asking me questions. Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was so confused and in shock that I couldn't answer his questions properly. Somehow, despite my broken answers, he figured out where my mom's car was. I told him something about a house with Christmas lights, even though it wasn't Christmas anymore. He knew the area well enough to piece it together, but before taking me back, he made me promise over and over that I wouldn't tell anyone about him. Not the police, not anybody. He told me the cops didn't like him, and I believed him. We started heading down the stairs, stepping over the man who had tried to kidnap me. He was still lying there, bleeding, not moving. I don't know if he was dead or not, but I hoped he was. Cigarette guy and I walked outside, and he started to panic every time he saw a cop car. He was fast walking, and my legs could barely keep up. When I started crying about my feet hurting, he sighed in frustration, picked me up awkwardly, and kept walking. We went behind buildings and houses, hiding every time a cop car drove by. Finally, in the distance, I saw my mom's car, surrounded by police. Cigarette guy put me down and told me to run to them. The pain in my legs disappeared as I ran toward my mom. She picked me up and hugged me tight. The police asked us both a bunch of questions, but my mom fed them some convoluted story that didn't make any sense. She told me not to say much, and I didn't. I was too scared and overwhelmed. A few days later, my dad picked me up, and he knew something was wrong. I told him everything. After that, I never lived with my mom again. When I got older and had time to think about it, I never forgave her. I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation. He told me that my mom was likely on a drug binge and that I got kidnapped. He thinks the guy who saved me, cigarette guy, probably had warrants out for his arrest, and that's why he was so panicked. Imagine being a criminal on the run, suddenly having a kidnapped girl with you, and having just beaten a man half to death. If the cops had caught us, he could have been charged with my kidnapping, and I wouldn't have been able to tell them that he was actually helping me. So, to the man who saved me, thank you. To the man who tried to kidnap me, let's never meet again. Update. I think I found cigarette guy. Someone on Reddit knows a man with a similar story. I hope it's the same person who saved me, and I'll keep everyone posted. Update 2. I finally got confirmation. I found cigarette guy. Due to the rules of this subreddit, I can't keep posting updates here, so I'll be sharing more details on my profile. So, to start, I'm a transgender woman, and I'm single. On all my dating profiles, I make my trans status very clear, except on Plenty of Fish, POF, because the platform treats any mention of being transgender as talking about sex, and will ban you for it. To navigate this, I simply state that I'm a strong supporter of trans rights. One day, I get a message from a guy. He lives about an hour away and seems kinda cute, but there's something off about him, something a bit creepy. Still, I decide to give him a chance, just like I would want. He mentions he's a smoker, but says he's trying hard to quit and only smokes when he's stressed. We have a decent conversation, and eventually he asks for my number. Without thinking too much, I give it to him, but let him know I'm getting ready for my evening classes, so I'll be slow to respond. Minutes later, he texts me, "Hi, it's username from POF." Normally, I have a standard reply I send when someone reaches out for the first time after exchanging numbers. "Hi, it's Allie. Just to be clear, since my profile might be a bit vague, I'm a transgender woman. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, so if you're not interested, I completely understand." But I hadn't gotten around to sending that message yet because I was busy with class prep. Then, out of nowhere, I get another text from him. "Who the hell is dead name, and why is he paying your cell phone bill?" Me. "Where did you even get that name?" Him. "Answer the question. Who is he?" At that moment, I realized he must have paid one of those sketchy websites that sell personal information for a fee. I was stunned but decided to be upfront. "Well, if you must know, I'm transgender, and that used to be my name. I was going to tell you when you pulled this stunt. Please do us both a favor and lose my number. That's incredibly invasive, and I don't want to talk to you anymore." His reply sent chills down my spine. "Do you still live at..." Insert my address. "I'm coming to see you so we can talk about this in person." Me, lying. "No, I moved a few months ago, and I'm about to head out as I mentioned. Leave me alone and don't contact me again." Him. "Since you're hiding something, I'm going to run a full background check on you. You lied to me and I don't appreciate that." I wasn't having it anymore. "I'm sending screen caps of this conversation, your POF profile, and your photos to my two best friends who work in law enforcement in your town, as well as my ex-boyfriend, who works for the sheriff's office. Don't text me again." That seemed to shut him down. I didn't hear from him for a while, but I stayed vigilant, making sure my doors and windows were always locked. I had my friends and ex checking on me periodically. Eventually, it became one of those things I laughed about nervously. Just a weird and creepy interaction. Then one day, I thought I saw him in the grocery store. Same dark hair, thick glasses, and that unsettling stare. He watched me as I shopped. My stomach dropped, but I couldn't be sure if it was really him. That night I was alone in my apartment, and I kept smelling cigarette smoke. The apartment complex where I lived had 3 units, but no shared air ducts. I assumed the smoke was from a neighbor's guest, though it felt odd. I stayed up late recording an ASL video for class, and my cat kept acting strangely, making it hard to focus. Finally, around 7 a.m., I finished the video and sent it in. I double-checked all the locks, set my alarm, and went to bed. The next morning, I hurried out the door for school, but something felt off. I couldn't quite place it at first. Later that day, after classes, I returned home and saw what had been bothering me. Each apartment had a small garden in front, and mine was typically tidy, with gravel and pavers left by the previous tenant. But now, there was a pile of cigarette butts right in front of my bedroom window. That's when it hit me. Someone had been standing there smoking and watching. I swept up the butts, and then my neighbor, an elderly man, came out. He asked if my boyfriend had found me. Confused, I asked what he meant. He explained that a young man had been waiting for me on my porch for hours the night before. The description, dark hair, thick glasses, chain smoking, fit the guy from POF. I texted my ex and contacted the cops, providing them with the screenshots and descriptions. A few weeks later, I moved out of state for unrelated reasons, and I legally changed my name, with closed records for extra security. Since then, I've stopped giving my number to men online. For just a few dollars, people can get everything about you from your phone number. To all the ladies and LGBTQ+ community, use a texting app until you really know someone. For reference, I work as a barista in a coffee shop inside a larger store. I am one of a handful of male baristas at my shop. I am gay and very open about this. I wear pride shoes, have a pride flag attached to my name tag, and sport a couple of wristbands with rainbows and phrases like Orlando Strong and a local LGBT+ center. The other day, while working my shift at the register, a gentleman approached me and smiled. I sensed he noticed the pride flag on my name tag, but he didn't mention it at first. He said he didn't know what to order and asked for my opinion. Though I am not particularly a coffee drinker, I know what drinks suit different tastes, so I asked him what he liked and tried to give recommendations. While talking, I could tell he was paying more attention to me than to what I was saying, which I was completely okay with. He was a shorter but well-built man with beautiful eyes and a nice beard. Eventually, he decided on a very sweet iced drink that we have, and I went to make it for him. As I was preparing the drink, one of my co-workers leaned over and whispered, "I think that customer just took a picture of you." That raised a red flag, but I thanked her and brushed it off. I gave him his drink and he smiled, pointing to the pride flag. "I love that flag. Where can I get one of those?" I laughed and told him I got it from a pride event I attended a few years ago. He then said, "And where can I get the person it is attached to?" I immediately felt a rush of emotions and started blushing, but trying to act professional, I brushed it off. He eventually took his drink and sat at one of the tables. As the day progressed, I debated whether to give in to this guy or not. Occasionally, I would glance at his table and see him looking at me. It felt like he was watching me no matter when I looked. I began to experience that strange feeling of heart eyes with red flags. I then noticed he hadn't taken a single sip of his coffee. Since it was an iced drink, I could see the clear plastic cup. When I had a break and went to wipe down some of the tables, I stopped by his table and asked if he didn't like the drink. If it wasn't to his taste, I could make him a new one at no cost. He handed me the drink, mentioning he was unsure if it was too sweet for him and asked me to try it. I politely declined, telling him I don't drink coffee. He was shocked and asked why I was working there. As we talked, though, his questions began to change. So do you lift at all? No, not really. Well, how much weight do you think you could lift if you needed to? The job requirement is 50 pounds, so I suppose at least that much. Well, I've learned that it's good to be able to lift at least half your body weight. How much do you weigh? Immediate red flags went off. The combination of the drink and those two questions made me feel like I was being asked how much of a fight I could hold, especially if I were drugged. Having been drugged at a party before, I've learned to pick up on these red flags, so I kindly and quickly ended the conversation and returned to cleaning up tables. As the hours passed, he continued to sit there without drinking his drink. Other employees and a couple of managers asked if everything was okay, and he claimed he was perfectly happy. Every now and then he took a phone call, and at one point I swear I could see a man on his phone at a different part of the store, talking opposite of the man at the table. Suddenly I started to feel like there were more eyes on me than I had realized. I pulled one of my managers to the back and shared that I was getting weirder feelings about the guy, and the manager said they would keep an eye on him. Now I was closing on this shift, and as we neared closing time, I noticed him still sitting there. When the announcement that the store would close in half an hour was made, he approached the counter and asked if he could walk me to my car after my shift. I told him our closing duties took at least 45 minutes after we closed, and he said he'd be happy to wait. I politely declined, and he asked when I worked next. I told him I was off for a couple of weeks. Well, then I feel like I should walk you to your car, especially if I might not be able to see you for a couple of weeks. No, absolutely not. I politely declined again, and eventually he left. I finished my closing duties and headed to the employee area. As soon as I arrived down there, I told one of my managers about the situation and asked if I could use the side exit from the store. At our store, we usually exit through the main doors after closing, but there is a side door we use to enter before opening, and that the managers use to leave after closing. He agreed and said he would walk with me to my car to ensure I was okay if I didn't mind waiting a little while. I was fine with that. I walked out the side doors with a couple of managers. I got into my car, and as I was driving away, I saw a large van with extremely tinted windows parked in front of the main entrance. There was no way to know for sure if my customer was in that van, or if it was as ominous as I thought it was, but I knew I was not about to stay to figure it out, and I took a long and winding path home that night. So, to the very hot guy that I sold coffee to, let's not meet. Unless, of course, I misread everything, and you were just awkward socially and genuinely interested in me, not in a creepy way, but just to be on the safe side, let's not meet. In 2014, I moved to England from Canada to gain work and travel experience, and also to find myself. I ended up living in Essex with 3 other roommates. They were all women and a bit older than I was. I was 24 at the time, Megan was 31, Cherry was 34, and Cassie was 38. Megan was from New York, Cherry was from New Jersey, and Cassie was from Poland. All 4 of us shared a 3-story flat. The back of our home was the living room and kitchen, with a complete glass wall that looked out into the garden, which was completely fenced in. The house had an interesting dynamic, to say the least. I have tons of stories from that time in my life. I adored all my roommates except for Cherry. After living with Cherry for 7 months, I was over her antics. One day I came home from work, locked the door, made myself something to eat, and went up to bed. I brought some work home with me, so I was in my nightgown with all these papers around me and my headphones on, jamming out. I wore headphones because Cherry was out to dinner with work friends, which meant booze, and soon after that, a tantrum was surely to come. I just didn't want to listen to her crazy scream crying. I was working away, completely focused, until I felt something. I looked up to see a man standing over me. I didn't register it right away and passively said, "Cherry's room is on the second floor," then continued to work, as Cherry regularly brought strange men home. He didn't leave. Again I said, "Cherry's room is downstairs, you..." He interrupted me. "I am not here for Cherry." A cold chill raced through my veins. My fight or flight kicked in. I started surveying the situation. I looked him up and down. He had a bottle of Prosecco in one hand and a knife in the other. He was about 5'10", with wild, muddy brown hair and black eyes. He wore a light blue polo shirt, one side of his collar popped up, and he had a distinct Manchester accent. Once I focused in, I realized his eyes appeared black because his pupils were completely dilated. I was in trouble. I needed an escape plan. Unfortunately, this man was standing between me and my bedroom door. I needed to get downstairs, but I had to make him think it was his idea. I decided to play along. Just then, he used his knife to pop the cork, and Prosecco began flowing onto my carpet. I said, "Oh no, let's clean that up. I prefer to drink out of a proper flute anyway." He nodded, replying, "Yeah, you're a proper classy bird. Let's go." I tried to act as natural as possible, not showing that I was shaking and trying to control my breathing. We took the long journey down to the main floor of my flat, all 3 floors. He had the back of my nightgown bunched up in one hand, and I could feel the point of the knife graze my back with his other hand. I was trying to speak playfully with him as we walked down the stairs. I couldn't tell you what I was saying. I was most likely rambling. I couldn't hear anything over my heart beating in my ears. We reached the bottom of the stairs. To my left was a hallway leading to the front door. On my right, which was much closer to us, was the kitchen and living room. We made our way into the kitchen, and I pointed to the cabinets with the wine glasses. He said he knew where they were and started toward them. I now had the kitchen table between us, and it was time to run. I burst into a sprint down the hallway toward the door. My hands fumbled over the locks, shaking and sweating. I swung open the door and saw 2 men walking across the street. They must have been walking home from the train, as there was a big train station in front of our home. I called out to them for help, and suddenly I was flung onto the ground. Little pebbles pierced my skin, sending sharp pains where they jabbed. The intruder pushed me out of the way to escape. One of the men chased after him while the other told me to go inside while he surveyed my home and called the police. I locked the doors and called the police. While I was on the phone with dispatch, I frantically ran around the house to double-check all the windows and doors. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang on my door. I informed the dispatch about the banging, and she told me the police were not there yet. I thought it might be one of the gentlemen who helped me. I went to look through the peephole, and it was him, the intruder. He had come back. He was banging on my door, screaming that I had his glasses and that he was not done with me. I absolutely freaked out. The dispatcher attempted to calm me down, but I was losing my mind. She then said, "They are pulling onto your street now. You should hear their sirens." I did. Thank God. The intruder then bolted. One officer jumped out of the passenger side while the car was still moving and chased after him. The second officer came into my home, interviewed me and the 2 gentlemen, collected evidence, and took photos. After some time, Cherry came home and freaked out. Once I explained the situation to her, she said, "Oh my God, that could have been me." Yeah, thanks, Cherry. It's all about you. The next morning, I was called in to identify a man they had in custody. I pointed him out. I went into a little room and the officer pulled out an evidence bag. He asked me if the items were mine. They were. There were my underwear and photos taken from my home. The officer informed me that the intruder had been stalking me for some time now. He estimated 3 months. He had made a nest outside our home on top of a hill that overlooked our living room and kitchen. He was a known sex offender and drug dealer. He then told me how lucky I was to get out practically unharmed. Others weren't so lucky. To the man who stalked me and broke into my home, let's not meet again. However, I would love to run into those 2 gentlemen again. Every day, I am thankful for them. This happened a few weeks ago. I work at a petrol station, and I have years of experience from a previous job, so getting this one was a piece of cake. However, this job was different because it involves lone working. Can you imagine being entirely alone for 8 hours, especially during late shifts? My shift started in the early afternoon. About half an hour into my shift, a guy walked in. I had seen him before. He entered the shop the day before and randomly asked me if I had any shopping bags to spare. He gave me uncomfortable vibes, but luckily someone else was working with me that day for a short while, so I asked them to deal with him. My colleague said they didn't have anything to spare and told him goodbye. He left. Anyway, back to that day. The same guy walked in and I thought, what does he want now? Another handout? He just walked up to the desk and started chatting with me. He asked for advice about his living situation, saying he used to be homeless. Since it's not really my place to give advice, and I just didn't want to be stuck talking to him, I shrugged and told him to sleep on it and think things over. He left without buying anything, just stopping by for a chat. Stupidly, I had told him that I finished my shift at 11 o'clock that night. I continued my shift as usual until 9:30 p.m. when he returned, but this time with another guy who looked suspicious. The guy who had entered the shop before poked his head in the door and asked if we did phone top-ups. We do, but something in my gut was screaming, "Make him leave now." So I lied and told him we did not. The 2 of them hung around outside while I served customers. Once the shop seemed quiet again, they both entered and started looking around. I noticed the dodgy guy kept his hands in his pockets the entire time, and then it hit me. Damn it, I'm getting robbed tonight. I took some deep breaths and tried to stay calm, repeating my training in my head. Just comply, give them what they want, then call the police after they leave. But panic set in, and I thought of a better plan. I stood ready with one hand under the desk, hovering over the panic button. I thought to myself that the minute they pulled a weapon on me, I would hit the button, show my hands, comply, and hope the police arrived in time to catch them. In the end, they just bought a bottle of water, and I felt a huge sigh of relief, thinking they just wanted water or decided not to rob me because someone else was outside. They left the store but lingered outside right by the door. I saw the car drive away and thought, I don't want these guys in the store again, especially while I'm completely alone. So I flipped the switch that automatically locks the main door. Half an hour passed with no customers, and the 2 guys were still hanging around outside. I called my boss to inform him of what was happening, and to give him a heads up that I would need to call the police soon, as it was making me very anxious. Then another guy showed up and joined the 2 guys, all dressed in black and wearing COVID masks. He handed masks to his friends and made his way around the back of the store. That's when I realized, crap, the back door, the one I go out from to puff on my vape. I ran to the back door, slammed it shut, and locked it. At this point, I was scared for my life. These guys were lurking around, and it felt like an hour and a half. I hid in the office watching the cameras. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. I was really freaking out. I had to listen carefully while the automated system went through the whole "press 1 for such and such option" thing. I couldn't focus as my colleague called me on my mobile to check in. I told him what was happening, then came out of the office to take a peek. Of course, those guys were right up to the window, knocking to grab my attention. And yes, they saw me with 2 phones to my ears. "Crap, they saw me," I said to my colleague on the phone. Then I came up with an idea. I put the phone making a call to the police down and kept my colleague on the line. I said, "Listen, I'm going to see what they want. Stay on the phone. I'm putting you on speaker. Stay quiet. Don't say a word, just listen. If you hear me say, 'The till is slow,' you hang up and call the police. That's me telling you I'm in danger." I put him on speaker and hid my phone in my bra, then headed to the window. "What's up, guys? Can I help you?" The guy asked. "Why is the door locked?" I took a breath. "That's because we're in night mode now. The doors are locked, but I can serve through the hatch. What can I get you?" They looked at each other and whispered among themselves. The guy said, "We'll just take branded tobacco name and a lighter." "Sure, one moment." I grabbed what they asked for. They pushed a 20-pound note through. I quickly grabbed the 20, checked it, and rang them up. As I had their change ready, I saw one hand through the hatch. I dropped their change into that hand, avoiding contact. "Okay, thank you. Bye now." I stared them down as they finally left for good. As soon as they were gone, I fell to the floor and burst out crying after holding in that fear for so long. I demanded that my shifts be changed to morning shifts after that night, or I would quit. So, a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years. After retiring, he moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money from another job, since he had his retirement and my mom's income as a bookkeeper and tax preparer, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations. Since it was a small town, the owners didn't mind if I came to help him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or cigarettes. This all took place in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990. I remember the date well because it was shortly after my birthday. At 15 years old in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work to get some experience on the road, both during the day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, with a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I generally spent most of the evening that way, reading books and getting up to run the register or stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something unusual caught my attention. I realized that a woman was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. This was strange because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember feeling strange and creeped out by her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was the town. This is important. My dad let her know that he was working and couldn't take her. She turned and looked at me, and while she was looking away from him, my dad caught my eye and subtly shook his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turned back to my dad and pointed at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I had done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he saw her walking up the drive. Well, she cussed him for a minute, and he basically told her to leave the store. She slammed the door open, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it. Then she stalked out of the store and down the driveway. I kept an eye on her and continued to watch as she made her way back to the interstate and started up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passed, and I was in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I heard my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your ass in here and look at this." I quickly ran to the living room and saw my dad pointing at the TV. I looked at the mugshot of the lady on the screen and immediately remembered her. It turns out I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and was eventually put to death. I still have nightmares about what could have happened. Hey everyone, before I begin, I want to share that I'm Japanese and English is not my first language, so please forgive any mistakes. For about a year now, I've been studying in Australia. At first, I was shy about meeting Australians and making friends because I worried about what to talk about. To overcome this, I decided to join my university's anime and manga club within 2 weeks of moving here. Anime and manga have a huge following in Australia, which was a surprise to me. In my hometown in Japan, it's more of a casual interest. We have some people who love to cosplay, but it's not as common as it seems to be here. I thought joining the club would help me meet cool, relaxed people who shared an interest in Japanese pop culture, making it easier to find conversation topics. I attended my first meeting, and it was really nice. Everyone was kind, and I was enjoying myself when a girl joined our conversation. She had cat ears attached to her head, which I found pretty funny. Suddenly, she looked at me strangely and asked, "Are you Japanese?" I replied that I was and introduced myself. She exclaimed, "Sugoi," which means awesome in Japanese, so I asked her, "Hey, you can speak some Japanese. What's your name?" That's when things took a strange turn. She said her name was Neko-chan, with Neko meaning cat, and chan being a suffix that shouldn't be used for oneself. I laughed and asked for her real name, but she insisted it was Neko-chan. Eventually, I gave up and asked her to say something in Japanese. However, her sentences were short and her pronunciation was hard to understand. She even spoke strangely in English, referring to herself in the third person, saying things like, "Neko-chan thinks you're kawaii." While it's not uncommon for some Japanese girls to speak like this, I found it childish and had never seen a Western woman do so. Still, I was glad she was trying, so I spent the night teaching her some words. But she kept claiming she already knew them, which I suspected wasn't true. For the rest of the night, I felt like I was her hostage. She constantly asked for my opinions on anime and manga, peppering the conversation with small Japanese words like kawaii and sugoi. She even tried to act out character scenes for me and had memorized some theme songs in Japanese. When the night was ending, I told her I had to go because I had a class the next morning. She followed me to the bus stop and waited with me. Still feeling uneasy about her, I reluctantly gave her my number when she asked for it. It took her only 3 minutes to send me a message saying I was kakoi, cool, and sakushi, sexy. Her mix of broken Japanese and English was confusing, and I started to feel annoyed. But I'm not confrontational, so I kept replying. Eventually, she shared her dream of wanting a Japanese boyfriend. I told her I wasn't looking for a girlfriend, but we could be friends. After that, she stopped messaging me. The next day, as I was leaving my classroom, I saw her waiting outside. I asked her what she was doing there, and she said, "Neko-chan was waiting for you." I was freaked out and confused, wondering how she knew where my class was. She then revealed she had a surprise for me and pulled out an art book filled with her drawings. While some of her manga art was good, I was horrified when she turned to a graphic drawing of two men having sex, both with tails and cat ears. She pointed to one of them and said, "Neko-chan drew you." I was frozen, unsure how to respond. I finally managed to say, "Thank you, but I have another class. I'll see you later," and quickly walked away feeling disturbed and sick. I called my tutor, who was Australian and my age, to seek advice. When I explained what happened, he initially didn't believe me but couldn't stop laughing once he understood. He agreed to meet with me to report her. At the campus security office, I realized I didn't know her real name, just Neko-chan. They asked me to message her to meet in the courtyard so they could escort her off campus. I sent a message saying I liked her drawing and wanted to talk about dating, which felt terrible to lie about, but I wanted to stop her from continuing her behavior. She arrived 20 minutes later and sat down, but before she could say anything, two security men approached her. They spoke quickly, and while I couldn't fully understand, they eventually took her away. I'll never forget the look she gave me, a mix of sadness and anger. I felt truly awful. Afterward, the security informed me that she wasn't even a student and was actually only 15 years old. I had no idea. I never saw her again and didn't return to the club, even though the other members were normal. Thinking back on that experience still freaks me out. My tutor ended up teaching me the meaning of the term weeaboo,